So, first of all, just tell us, even though many of our viewers know, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, the Village of Peninsula has engaged me to provide them with a tool they can use to augment their safety forces through modern technology for photo enforcement and to help them reduce speeds on their streets. So my firm helps them manage that process. We help them find vendors, we do this kind of communication for them, and we administer their program.
It's not your only job.
Correct. That's correct. I actually own several other businesses, and as recently was just reelected to my fourth term as mayor of Newburgh Heights.
Is that a full-time job?
By statute, it's full-time, and I spend more than full-time there. Yeah, so I'm there quite a bit.
Can you manage all of these jobs?
Yeah, no. So that's a question, obviously, that I had and was addressed with the authorities here in the Village of Peninsula. And because of my experience and my ability to manage multiple hats and functions in the past, I've always had multiple employment and career paths in businesses at the same time. So it's second nature and second hand for me. Yeah.
How many municipalities do you serve?
How many does my business? So we actually have several clients. I think the number is 4 or 5. I'd have to, a couple were not quite signed contracts, but we're close.
Can you describe this a little bit, but I want to ask again more specifically, what does your company do for the Village of Peninsula?
Yeah, so we do a number of things. We do communications with the public. We make sure that the municipality is following the state statutes. We keep them up to date on what's happening in Columbus. We provide them with advice as to recommendations for the best use, how they should be using their program, what they should set thresholds at, things like that, so that they're fair with the public, as well as identifying potential vendors that actually, provide the technology itself. The camera they use, for example, they bought a model from Custom Signals, as opposed to there's 3 or 4 other models out there. So we provide them with that kind of advice and recommendation.
So does someone else take care of the actual tickets themselves and mailing them out?
Yeah, we have a firm that actually does the processing itself, that does the mail. They review the citations, they review the information, put it in a package, send it to the police department for final review. Does the license plate match the color of the car? Does can you see the license plate clearly? Things like that. And then the officer reviews that data, and then before it's approved, that's the final approval phase of it. So the other vendor we have provides that to the police department for review.
We interviewed one driver whose ticket was incorrect. It was not the car in the photo.
Mm-hmm.
It was dismissed. How often do mistakes like that happen?
They're very rare. I would say that they're less than 0.1%. I mean, they're so rare. We don't really have statistics on it.
How do you know it's that rare?
Because we don't get that complaint. We do get it from time to time, and it has happened. But when it does, we do what you would do in any administrative process. You dismiss the citation. So that's how it works. It's that simple.
How much money has your company made from helping the Village of Peninsula?
So our contract provides us with a 60-40% split. The village keeps 60% of the revenue generated. That is pretty much industry standard.
And your 40%, how much did you make last year?
I think the total last year was something about $400,000.
For just targeting and solutions limited?
Correct, right.
What was the total amount collected?
I believe the village collected over $1 million. I don't know the exact total off the top of my head.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, it is. What that indicates is that there's a lot of people breaking the law.
What is the goal of the program?
The goal of the program, ideally, is to get people to slow down.
Is it effective?
We believe it is.
How do you know?
Based on the number of citations that are being issued, we are delivering citations to people that are speeding, and that is how you eventually slow people down. The oddity to that question to me is, if there were 60 police officers spending all day long doing the exact same thing, would people be asking that question? How do you know it slows folks down? Does a officer issuing a citation, does that slow people down?
I think that's a fair question regardless.
No.
Is it an effective way to deter speeders?
Yeah, I think it's the tried and true method of slowing people down, yes.
Drivers have told me they can never see the police officers manning these cameras. Are they hiding?
We don't believe they're hiding. They're positioning themselves so they can have an accurate view of the roadway.
Would it be more effective to be more visible?
We've taken that approach, and they are visible. That's has nothing to do with whether a motorist is following the speed limit. What you're suggesting is that a motorist only has to follow the speed limit if they don't see a police officer.
But we all slow down when we see a police officer
Sure.
and check the speedometer.
Right.
Would
That's
that be more effective to deter speeding?
the way you deter speeding is the citation. When the motorist receives the citation, they realize, oh, I need to pay more attention to the road. I need to pay more attention. So when it really comes down to the basis, there's a reason that we put the black and white signs on the road with numbers. I've had tickets, I get it. So I am very vigilant now about what I'm doing as far as the speed limit.
What evidence, though, is there? Speeding is one of the leading causes of deadly crashes in this
Absolutely.
country. And there are speed limits everywhere and people being cited everywhere. So
Yeah.
you could argue that that's not really as effective as we would want it to be. What evidence do you have that this method of enforcement is any better than any other?
I would ask, what would be the alternative? Not enforce the speed limit?
I'm talking about enforcing it in this manner.
Yeah. We found this is, in fact, the most effective based on the sheer number of citations being issued. That is an illustration of exactly how bad the problem is. And evidence of that is the number of citations. Here's the other really interesting point about the complaint about these citations. These citations aren't being issued to people that are doing 1, 2, 4, 5, 7 miles over the speed limit. These are folks doing 11 miles over the speed limit in, as you know, a very congested, small, compressed area.
86% of the tickets we found were issued to drivers going 11 miles per hour, 50 miles per over the speed limit.
So if we made
Is that dangerous?
well, if we made the citation, well, if it absolutely is. If you look at the difference of a collision at 35 compared to 25, the rate of fatalities increases dramatically. So if you're doing 35 and that rate is 46, the damage caused by that extra 10 miles an hour is exponentially greater. So it is dangerous, but I would argue, to go back to the point you're making, of 86% of the citations are issued to those doing 11 to 15 over the speed limit. If the village chose to make the threshold 16 over the speed limit, then 86% of those citations would be 16 over the speed limit. So the answer is, it doesn't matter what you set that threshold. Of course, the lower end of the threshold is going to be where the majority of the tickets are issued.
But 11 miles per hour over is the bare minimum to give someone a citation.
Yeah, that's right. And we think that's very, very fair.
When you talk, though, about deterring crashes, there were no fatal crashes in Peninsula over the last 6 years.
Sure. And the goal is to make sure that doesn't happen.
The majority of crashes were property damage, and there were only 107
Sure.
over 6 years.
And ideally, if we can make that 0, that's our goal.
Some drivers might say that you're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist.
Everyone has a right to their opinion. No one likes to receive citations, and that's really what this comes down to. Those issuing and complaining the most, and those that complaining, frankly, are those that have received citations. We get it. Nobody likes to receive a citation. And we're asking folks to slow down. And frankly, your coverage of this, your station as well as others, are helping us in that process. If people want to put this program, this style of program, out of business, if you will, the way is stop speed.
We've talked to several drivers who now say they avoid going through Peninsula.
That's a shame. There's no reason for anybody to avoid going through Peninsula unless they're choosing to break the law.
A lawyer we interviewed said it. The program is just revenue generation disguised as a public safety measure. What would you say?
I would say you'd probably find an opinion of that from 5 different lawyers. You get 5 different opinions.
The mayor himself has said at times that money is a factor.
The revenue generated by a program, I don't recall the mayor saying that money is a factor. I know in another community, a mayor made that statement, and I think that was a misguided statement. Having said that, what the revenue generated by photo enforcement programs does is allow the police department to utilize their tools for other kinds of law enforcement, boosting safety, not just from a perspective of how it works in the roadway, but a more broadly based perspective, such as purchasing drones and equipment like that they can use for searches and review of lost park pedestrians, I guess, hikers, whatever you might call them. So revenue is a factor, but if the reality is to be, as I mentioned, if you put 60 police officers on the street and they spent all day long pulling people over, which they clearly could do in Peninsula, that would generate revenue too.
What proof do you have this roadway is any safer?
Based on the number of citations that are being issued, and you just said it yourself, people are slowing down, people are avoiding using it because they want to speed. Otherwise, why would you avoid it? That's evidence right there. Anecdotal, of course, but it's evidence.
That's just anecdotal evidence. Yeah. What proof do you have that this actually works?
We see it ourselves. Our police officers telling us there's fewer people speeding. They are speeding, that they're going lower levels. That argument can be made on any road, regardless of the type of enforcement. What do you see? What evidence, what proof do you have? It's kind of hard to prove the negative.
But there were still about the same number of crashes last year with the photo enforcement program in place. So doesn't that tell you that it's having no impact?
No, it doesn't tell us that at all. What it tells us is that it may take time, and it could be a longer period of time before crashes are eliminated altogether. One of the goals is not just that you're going to eliminate crashes, but the severity of crashes. Ideally, if someone is doing 25 instead of 46, or if the speed limit's 35 and they're doing 35, the damage, if a crash does occur, is going to be reduced. And that's part of the goal, is to make sure, and hopefully people understand, that fatalities are really not acceptable on the roadways anymore.
Again, there have been no fatal crashes
Yeah.
in the Village of Peninsula in at least 6 years.
Right, and we're hoping to keep it that way.
Again, I want to mention that several drivers we interviewed used words like greedy and cash grab. And several drivers we interviewed, they used words like greedy and cash grab to describe the program.
Mm-hmm.
How would you answer that?
If this individual were to have received a citation from a police officer, the penalty they would have experienced would have been substantially greater. They would have had court costs, they would have had points on their license, it would have impacted their insurance rates, their fine would have been similar, if not the same. So the argument that it's greedy, what they're really saying is, I'm mad I got caught.
Doesn't an officer have the discretion, though, at 11 miles per hour over? Doesn't an officer have the discretion to just give a driver a warning?
Yeah, there's a common mythology around that idea in law enforcement, the media, the public, that I'm going to talk my way out of a citation. When you're doing 11, there's an old expression, I think it came from the Ohio State Patrol. It's 9-year fine, 10-year mine. What that means is you're getting a ticket at 10 miles and over. Now, I'm not suggesting that somebody couldn't sweet talk their way out of a ticket, but it's so rare and so less common than people make an assumption that it is.
Some drivers were going really fast.
Mm.
Why aren't police pulling them over?
that actually that is one of the rationale for photo enforcement as well. Police chases are dangerous. Many communities are moving toward and moving away from high-speed chases. A motorist traveling at that rate of speed, 70, 80, whatever it might be, is likely to run because that's an automatic impound. That's an automatic arrest. You don't want to exacerbate the problem by pursuing somebody. Now, in some scenarios, in a scenario like that, if the officer were try to put his camera down, and then get in his vehicle and move to pursue that motorist is gone. And at least in this scenario, some form of penalty can be issued.
Why are we talking to the mayor of Newburgh Heights about something happening in the Village of Peninsula?
Well, you're not talking to Mayor of Newburgh Heights about something happening in the Village of Peninsula. You're talking to Trevor Elkins, who is the vendor and the provider of a program to the Village of Peninsula. I'm actually here representing Mayor Schneider because that is my agreement and contract with the Village of Peninsula. So my other employment really is not relevant to this particular scenario. You're talking to me because I understand the program in a way that I can answer these questions for and on behalf of the elected officials of Peninsula. That's what they hired me to do. That's why you're having this conversation with me.
Do elected officials have an obligation to answer the public's questions?
I think that's a answer that is being addressed by this interview. I have a much broader, deeper scope of these programs, how they work, not just here in Peninsula, but across the state of Ohio, that allows them the comfort to know that when these questions are being answered, they're being answered in a way that's factual and provides the information the public needs to hear to understand why the village is engaged in this type of enforcement.
Why won't the mayor talk to us?
Because he's hired me to do that for him.
As an elected official, shouldn't he explain the decisions he's made?
He has. He's done that through the legislation they've adopted. He's addressed that with his community and the public. And he's explained this over and over again. So I think at this point, he's moved on. They've determined the rationale for why they've got the program. And he's asked me to have this conversation with you.
Would you hire someone to speak for you as the mayor?
I've done that. Many communities do that. There's spokesmen, especially the larger communities, have spokespeople for them. Yeah.
You don't think somebody who's elected to office as mayor has an obligation to answer the public's questions?
I didn't say that. I didn't say that at all. I meant you're a member of the media. He's asked me to answer these questions for you. He's addressed the questions to the public when they've attended the council meeting. There's been media that's attended council meetings that he's addressed the questions. So the answer is he's answered the questions to the public. He's asking me to do that for him at this point moving forward. That's the agreement the Village of Peninsula has with my firm. And it's not an uncommon practice for municipalities or government agencies to have spokespeople.
What do you want to add that I haven't asked?
I don't think I want to add anything. We feel very comfortable about the operation of the program, the way it's supposed to operate. We comply with the law. We comply with directives of the court. And we believe it's an effective program.
Did you have anything you wanted to ask?
I don't think so.
Do you have anything you wanted to ask? I think that's all.
Can you hang for just a second? I just want to grab these shots.
Sure. I wanted to let you know we will make another effort to talk to the mayor because he is the decision maker, and I'm sure you understand that.
Listen, I understand that completely. And there's no animus. I know you're doing your job, and he's doing his, and I'm doing mine, quite frankly.
Right. Due to the fact that you're also the mayor of Newburgh Heights, it feels unusual.
Sure.
We wouldn't be asking any of the religious people to, but I do understand in your role
Yeah.
why it is appropriate for us to talk to you too.
Yeah. Me as the mayor of Newburgh Heights, I don't have a
I did want to ask a few more things.
Yeah, go ahead.
about Newburgh Heights program?
Okay. So Newburgh Heights program is run by a different firm. Obviously, there's conflict of interest reasons there. It ran while I wasn't there. It ran when I was there before I even had a firm operating camera programs. It works essentially the same way that the program here in Peninsula works.
What gave you the idea for your business?
Watching so many municipalities in Ohio deal with camera companies that would come into the state, set up these programs, and kind of leave the administration of the programs to the individuals in the cities, the police departments, the elected officials, the village administrators, kind of leave them after the program was set up and they were starting to generate money and the camera company was making money, just leave them there to fend for themselves, to not have a way to take corrective action, to not have a way to follow sound principles to make the program fair, to not have a way to communicate and liaison with legal counsel and law enforcement, with the courts, with the legislature. So my role is to kind of help the municipalities do that. And the camera companies themselves don't. So I really work for the municipalities, not the camera companies, if that makes sense. Of course, we have to engage a camera company to perform the ultimate technology side of it. But that's really what my job and responsibility is to support the partnership between the two, to make sure that the municipalities are successful in their efforts with speed enforcement, and in some cases red light and or school bus enforcement.
I would think you got the idea from the village that you run.
So just as the village, the idea came from another entity, another city gave the Village of Newburgh Heights 15 years ago the idea to have cameras. Sure, ideas pass along, yeah. And I gained from that experience of understanding the shortcomings of the program that occurred in Newburgh Heights, and found that I believe I can provide some level of expertise to other municipalities as they add programs. And they're starting to proliferate across the state because they are effective tools.
Is it fair to the taxpayers in Newburgh Heights for you to have so many jobs?
So I've always had the taxpayers in Newburgh Heights, and I think, I've always had outside employment, always, in the entire time I've been an elected official in Newburgh Heights. What my constituents and residents in Newburgh Heights understand is I do a good job for them. And my position is a 24/7 position as a elected official and mayor. So there are many times that I am working, Sunday night at 9:00 at night for them, and they know I deliver for them. So I think that they're pretty comfortable with my ability to manage my time and provide them the value that they get from my salary and my experience as mayor.
Some drivers will describe your village's program as a speed trap.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say?
That has been, before cameras existed, drivers described Newburgh Heights as well as 60 other communities as speed traps. Newburgh Heights was very aggressive and always has, in my experience and history, even before I was an elected official in Newburgh Heights, has always had an history as being an aggressive speed enforcement community. It's something that we believe matters.
Is this now a speed trap?
I don't think speed trap is a term that is fair. And the reason I say that is because trap would imply the motorist that's receiving the citation has not violated the speed limit in an egregious and excessive way. Peninsula is not doing that. 11 miles an hour over the speed limit is very fair. It provides a huge cushion and room for error for the motorist, by the tune in most cases of about 40% or more.
I just have a quick question about, so in Newburgh, your guy is either on the bridge or he's in a safe place.
Correct. That's
Off
right.
the road or shoulder, whatever. here on 303, it's very wooded, the roads kind of curve around and stuff. Where are because clearly from the pictures on the citations, it's sort of like a telephoto kind of, get the license plate. Are they camped out in like private driveways or on lawns, or where are they?
So they
Go ahead and talk to us, Sarah.
Yeah, so Sarah, they move. They have about 6 or 8 different locations around the village that they utilize the handheld photo enforcement unit, and they move. And they're in various locations. Some of them are like one's I think on the I guess it would be the west end of the village. One of the frequent locations that they operate from is a place called the Quarry Drive. And it's just west of the cemetery. So they park there on the side of the road. It is a private drive. I think it's a private drive. I actually don't know that for sure. It's a drive that they have permission to operate from, and they do. So they've actually set the tripod up in front of this building and issued citations as people went through the middle of town. They've set them up as they've gone southbound from here. So they move around, and sometimes they're on driveways, sometimes they are on front lawns, sometimes they're sitting on village property or berms. They move around, and that's the effectiveness of the tool they're using. The state legislature made it very clear that they wanted an officer present. Although the Supreme Court of Ohio overturned that requirement, said it's not necessary. Peninsula has kind of honored that request by the state. Now they actually have an officer using the equipment, just as, for example, Newburgh Heights does, and a number of other communities do. So the officer's there with the tool. It's not an automated tool. Nothing happens. He could hold that camera, and 700 cars could drive by, and not a single citation would be issued. It's not until he's used his law enforcement training to see somebody that he thinks is speeding, then he activates that camera. That's a very stark difference between the two procedures.
And I just want to go over again, just to clarify. Is the goal of this program in Peninsula to generate revenue?
No, the goal is to get people to slow down. And in that process, as people choose to continue to break the law and violate the speed limit, it will generate revenue. Nobody is naive enough to say that that's not going to happen. In the same way, when an officer pulls somebody over or issues a citation, that creates revenue too.
Good.
Do you know they got permission to be in those private driveways?
I couldn't tell you. I don't know.
Yeah.
I would assume they do, or they wouldn't do it. But I don't know that exact answer.
We were just wondering.
Yeah, I can get an answer for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just, I
Of course.
would assume 2, but it's not a huge deal. But
Yeah. No, I understand completely.
Oh, do you still? Can you?
Yeah, you
still
can sit
have
down
a
for 1
seat?
second.
Oh.
Sorry, I was going to get it first.
I don't know when this will end.
Okay.
It will be maybe in a week. It'll be sometime next week, I would imagine.
Sure.
I will keep you posted and let you know.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Usually what happens is they tell someone a date and then it changes and then I have to call you back.
I understand how that goes.
Yeah, things change, yeah. We're at the mercy of events beyond our control.
No, well, I get it.
Mm-hmm.
There's hurricanes and
Mm-hmm.
unfortunate school shootings and
Yeah.
awful things like that. So, in the grand scheme of things, I don't know that people speeding and continuously violating the speed limit is the top of the news chain when it comes to other issues like that.
I understand that perspective.
Yeah.
It is something people are passionate about.
For sure. Yeah, we've developed a culture in this country and probably others as well, where the speed limit seems to be this arbitrary number, arbitrary thing that exists. And, I was fortunate enough to attend testimony and hearings in Columbus where motorists that actually supported modern technology being used for speed enforcement, which, by the way, all over the Eastern Seaboard is commonplace. New York has it, Maryland, DC, it's new, I think, in a mental capacity for Ohio motorists, even though it's existed for 20 some years. As it proliferates and becomes more common, more and more people are exposed to it. But what as a reverse, what they're ignoring is their own personal action or their own responsibility to pay attention to where they are on the roads and what those speed limits are. Not suggesting that mistakes don't get made, because they do. People lose track of where they are. They lose track of how fast they're going. That is not, unfortunately, an excuse. And when it comes to whether you get a citation or not, and I heard firsthand. I was in Senate testimony, listening to people talk about their child that had been hit, their grandmother that had been hit, their own cars that had been driven into because the person was simply going too fast and could not slow down. So that's why we do this.
Is there a specific study that you would cite or refer us to that?
Yeah, there's actually many. If you go to the Village of Peninsula's photo enforcement information page, and I can send you a link to that, there are 3 major sites, including by the federal government, that highlight it. President Biden actually, in a bill here or in a budget a couple of years back, when he first took office, one of the things he talked about was increasing the use of photo enforcement for speed and red light control. It's recognized as a tool that is effective. It does work. It's painful for some folks because, again, we've developed this culture that speed limits are kind of arbitrary. You don't really have to follow them. And that's the corrective action, I think, that's occurring.
You're not wrong that speeding is one of the leading 3 causes of deadly crashes in the U.S. So,
well, and as you read the studies, you're going to find that speeding is probably the leading cause of all crashes, not just deadly crashes.
And maybe somebody who's speeding also is intoxicated.
Often go
Distracted.
together.
Yeah, there's
Often go
3.
together. Yep.
You might have all 3 together.
Yeah.
The
100%.
Person who's intoxicated, I don't know if they're more likely to speed, but you do see those go together.
I think it's true. I think you're probably right. People that are hopefully of the
I just know that that's one of the top factors.
It is, absolutely. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, guys.